Hi, I'm Zoe. 3 weeks ago, my father sat across from the man I'm supposed to marry and told him I was a dangerous criminal. What my dad didn't know was that Marcus, my fiancé, was the detective who proved my innocence 5 years ago. He never told me he knew my story. I never told him about the worst night of my life. And now, everything we built together is hanging by a thread because of one man's need to destroy anything good that happens to me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain in Portland has a way of making everything feel heavier. And that Tuesday evening was no exception. I stood in the kitchen of Marcus's Pearl District loft, watching the droplets race down the floor-to-ceiling windows, while the city lights blurred into watercolor streaks below. The smell of garlic and rosemary filled the air from the chicken I'd been roasting for the past hour, but my stomach felt too twisted to think about eating. Marcus was running late from the precinct again, which wasn't unusual for a detective in Southeast Portland. What was unusual was the text message I'd received that morning from my father. Dinner tonight, the Observatory, 7:30. Important family discussion about your upcoming wedding. No, please. No, would you be available? Just a command disguised as an invitation. Richard Brennan had perfected that tone over 32 years of my life. I heard Marcus's key in the lock just as I was pulling the chicken from the oven. He appeared in the doorway, his dark hair slightly damp from the rain, still wearing his navy blazer with that small coffee stain on the sleeve that he claimed gave it character. His smile, the one that had made me forget how to breathe when we first met at Grind Coffee Roasters 18 months ago, faltered when he saw my face. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting his badge and service weapon on the counter with practiced ease. "You look like someone just told you Christmas was cancelled." I set the roasting pan down harder than necessary, the sound echoing through his minimalist kitchen. "My father wants to have dinner tonight. All of us. He says it's about the wedding." I turned to face him, crossing my arm. "Marcus, I haven't had a family dinner with my parents in over 2 years. The last time I tried, my father spent the entire evening explaining to anyone who would listen why my career in graphic design was a waste of my art degree." Marcus moved closer, his cop instincts kicking in. I could see it in the way his eyes sharpened, the slight tilt of his head, that meant he was processing information. Did he say what specifically he wanted to discuss? No, but when Richard Brennan summons people to the observatory, it's never good news. I pulled off my apron, suddenly feeling trapped in the small space. "That place costs $300 a person. Marcus. He's not spending that kind of money unless he's planning something." The observatory was Lake Oswego's most exclusive restaurant, the kind of place where my father took potential business partners when he needed to intimidate them with his success. Richard Brennan owned 4 auto dealerships across the Portland metro area, and had never let anyone forget it. Growing up, I'd learned that expensive venues were his way of ensuring people couldn't make a scene when he delivered bad news. Marcus reached for my hands, his calloused fingers gentle against my palms. "Hey, look at me. We don't have to go if you don't want. We can call and tell him we're sick, or that work ran late, or that my grandmother's cat died." "Your grandmother doesn't have a cat. She could get one between now and dinner." Despite everything, I found myself smiling. This was what I loved about Marcus Sullivan. In a world where my family treated every conversation like a business negotiation, he made everything feel lighter. He had this way of finding humor in dark places, probably a survival mechanism from 8 years of police work. "We have to go," I said finally. "If we don't, he'll just keep pushing until we do. And besides, you haven't officially met my parents yet. They've been asking about you." That wasn't entirely true. My mother Patricia had been asking about him in that polite, surface-level way she inquired about everything in my life, like she was checking items off a list. My father had been conspicuously silent about Marcus, which in the Brennan family dynamic was somehow worse than outright disapproval. Marcus studied my face for a long moment. "There's something else, something you're not telling me." He was right, of course. There was always something else with my family, layers of history and hurt that I'd spent years trying to bear. But how do you explain to someone that your own father has spent 3 decades systematically undermining every relationship, every job opportunity, every moment of happiness you've ever tried to build. How do you tell the man you love that your family doesn't just disapprove of your choices? They actively sabotage them. My father doesn't think anyone is good enough for me, I said, which was both true and completely inadequate. He's never approved of anyone I've dated. He finds ways to drive them away. What kind of ways? I moved to the window, pressing my palm against the cool glass. He tells them things about my past, about my character. He has a way of planting seeds of doubt and then watering them until they grow into something that chokes out whatever good was there. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the sound of rain against the windows and the distant hum of traffic below. When I turned back, Marcus was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. There was concern there, but something else too. Something that looked almost like recognition. What kind of things does he tell them? His voice was carefully neutral, the way it got when he was working a case. It doesn't matter, I said quickly. The point is, he's going to try to do the same thing to you. He's going to look for your weak spots and press until something breaks. He's going to make you question whether you really know me. Marcus was quiet for so long that I started to worry I'd said too much. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than before. Zoe, is there something about your past that you think would change how I feel about you? The question hit me like a physical blow. Not because it was accusatory, but because it was so gentle, so full of love and concern, that it made my chest ache. This was the question I'd been dreading for 18 months, the one that kept me awake at night, even though I told myself it didn't matter anymore. Everyone has things they'd rather forget, I said, turning back to the window. Things that happened when they were younger, when they made different choices. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you right now. I heard him move behind me, felt the warmth of his presence, as he stopped just close enough that I could lean back against him if I wanted to. But I didn't. I couldn't, because if I let myself take that comfort, I might tell him everything, and I wasn't ready for that conversation. Not yet. Maybe not ever. We should get ready, I said. He made the reservation for 7:30, and you know how he feels about punctuality. Zoe, I need to change. This dress isn't fancy enough for the observatory. Zoe, look at me. I turned, and the expression on his face nearly undid me. It was the same look he'd given me that first day at Grind Coffee when I'd spilled my latte all over his morning newspaper and started apologizing so profusely that he'd started laughing. Patient, amused, and completely focused on me like I was the only person in the world who mattered. Whatever your father says tonight, whatever he tries to do, it doesn't change anything between us. You understand that, right? I wanted to believe him. I wanted to have his confidence that our relationship was strong enough to weather whatever storm my father was about to unleash. But I'd seen Richard Brennan in action before. I'd watched him dissect my college boyfriend's family financial history over Christmas dinner until the poor guy excused himself to the bathroom and never came back. I'd seen him present my last serious relationship with a background check he'd commissioned, complete with credit reports and employment verification. Promise me something, I said. Anything. Promise me that when he starts talking, when he tells you whatever he's planning to tell you, you'll remember this moment. You'll remember that I love you, and that whatever happened before, it doesn't define who I am now. Marcus cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs brushing across my cheekbones. I promise, but Zoe, I need you to promise me something too. What? Promise me that you'll trust me enough to tell me the truth. Not tonight, not at dinner with your parents, but soon. Because whatever it is, whatever you think is so terrible that it might change everything, you're wrong. Nothing could make me love you less. I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady. But even as I agreed, I could feel the weight of 5 years of silence pressing down on my chest. There were some truths that couldn't be undone once they were spoken. Some stories that changed everything, no matter how much love existed before them. An hour later, we were driving through the winding roads of Lake Oswego in Marcus's Honda Civic, the radio playing softly between us. I'd changed into the navy blue dress Marcus had bought me for my birthday, the one that made me feel confident and beautiful and worthy of the man sitting beside me. My hair was pulled back in a low chignon, and I'd applied just enough makeup to hide the fact that I'd been fighting back tears for the better part of the evening. The observatory sat on a hill overlooking the Willamette River, its glass walls offering panoramic views of the city lights below. Even from the parking lot, I could see my parents' Mercedes in the valet area, my father's vanity plate, reading deals one like a small monument to his ego. "Last chance to run," I said as Marcus turned off the engine. "Not happening," he replied, but his hand found mine across the center console. "We're in this together, remember?" The hostess led us through the dining room to a private corner table where my parents were already seated. Richard Brennan stood as we approached, all 6 feet 2 inches of him imposing in his charcoal suit and silk tie. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his smile practiced and cold. My mother remained seated, elegant as always in her cream-colored blouse and pearl necklace, her blonde hair styled in the same bob she'd worn for the past decade. "Zoe, sweetheart," my father said, embracing me with the kind of hug that looked affectionate from a distance but felt hollow up close. "You look lovely, and this must be Marcus." He extended his hand to my fiancé, his grip firm and just a little too long. I watched Marcus's face carefully, looking for any sign that he was intimidated, but he met my father's gaze steadily. "Mr. Brennan, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. Zoe's told me so much about you. All good things, I hope," my father replied with a laugh that didn't reach his eye. "Please, sit. Patricia and I have been looking forward to this for months." The first 20 minutes passed with the kind of polite conversation that felt like walking through a minefield. My parents asked Marcus about his work, his family, his intentions regarding their daughter. He answered everything with the easy confidence I'd fallen in love with, never seeming ruffled by my father's increasingly probing questions. "So, detective work," my father said, cutting into his steak with surgical precision, "must be fascinating, dealing with all kinds of people. Criminals, victims, people who aren't always what they seem." "It is," Marcus agreed. "You learn pretty quickly that everyone has a story. Most of the time people aren't as simple as they appear on the surface." "How true," my mother murmured, glancing at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I imagine you see all sorts of cases," my father continued. "Theft, assault, robbery. Do you ever work on older cases? Cold cases, they call them." I felt my appetite disappear completely. The salmon on my plate suddenly looked unappetizing, the careful arrangement of vegetables meaningless. This was it. This was the moment I'd been dreading. "Sometimes," Marcus said carefully, "though most of my current caseload involves active investigations." Of course. My father set down his knife and fork, giving Marcus his full attention. "I was just thinking about how important it is for families to know everything about the people their children choose to marry. Full transparency, you understand. No surprises, Dad," I said quietly, warning in my voice. "What, sweetheart? I'm just making conversation." But his smile was predatory now, the same expression he wore when he was about to close a deal that would leave the other party wondering what had just happened to them. "Marcus seems like a good man," my mother said, her voice carefully neutral. "Steady job, respectable family. But Richard has always believed that honesty is the foundation of any strong relationship." "I couldn't agree more," Marcus replied, and I could hear the edge creeping into his voice. He wasn't stupid. He could feel the trap being laid as clearly as I could. "Which is why," my father said, reaching into his briefcase, "I think it's important that you know exactly who you're planning to marry." He pulled out a manila folder, thick with papers, and placed it on the table between them. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. I knew what was in that folder before he opened it, knew that this moment had been inevitable since the day I'd said yes to Marcus's proposal. "Daddy, don't," I whispered, but he was already sliding a photograph across the table. It was a mugshot, 5 years old, grainy, and clearly taken during one of the worst nights of my life. The girl in the photo looked younger than her 27 years, her dark hair tangled, her eyes wide with shock and fear. She was wearing an orange jumpsuit and holding a placard with a booking number. Marcus picked up the photograph, his expression unreadable. The silence at the table was deafening, broken only by the soft clink of silverware from other diners, and the muted conversations happening at tables around us. "Richard," my mother said softly, but there was no real reproach in her voice. "Armed robbery," my father said, his voice carrying just enough to be heard at our table but not beyond it. "Multnomah County, your fiancé was arrested for holding up a convenience store in Beaverton. She spent 3 days in jail before the charges were dropped." I watched Marcus's face, looking for the moment when everything would change. The moment when he would see me differently, when the trust we'd built would crumble under the weight of my father's revelation. But his expression remained perfectly calm, professional even. "The charges were dropped," he said, finally, setting the photograph back down on the table. "Yes, well," my father continued, "apparently there was some issue with the evidence, a technicality really. But the point is, she was arrested, she was charged, and she never told you." Marcus looked at me then, and I felt my world tilt on its axis, because there was no surprise in his eyes, no shock, no betrayal, no confusion, just a deep, quiet sadness that seemed to reach across the table and wrap around my heart. "No," he said softly, "she never told me." The words hung in the air between us like a death sentence. My father sat back in his chair, satisfaction written across his features. He'd done exactly what he'd set out to do. He'd taken the secret I'd carried for 5 years, and used it as a weapon against the only good thing in my life. "I think," my mother said quietly, "that perhaps we should give you two some time to process this information." "Actually," Marcus said, his voice steady and calm, "I think Mr. Brennan and I should have a conversation, man to man." He stood up, straightening his jacket. "Sir, would you mind stepping outside with me for a moment?" My father's eyes lit up with something that looked like triumph. "Of course, I think that's very mature of you, son." They walked toward the restaurant's entrance, leaving my mother and me alone at the table. I stared down at the photograph of my younger self, that frightened girl who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time, who'd made one terrible decision that had nearly destroyed her life. "He had to know," my mother said quietly. "Better now than after the wedding, don't you think?" I looked up at her, this woman who'd given birth to me, but had never really fought for me, who'd stood by and watched my father systematically destroy every relationship I'd ever tried to build. "Did you know?" I asked. "Did you know that this is what he was planning to know?" She didn't answer, which was answer enough. Outside, through the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see Marcus and my father standing in the parking lot. My father was gesturing, probably delivering the final blow, explaining to the man I loved why I was damaged goods, why any smart person would walk away, now before things got more complicated. But Marcus wasn't walking away, he was listening, his hands in his pockets, his expression thoughtful. And then, to my complete amazement, he started talking. Not the defeated posture of a man who'd just learned his fiancé was a criminal, but the confident stance of someone who had something to say. The conversation lasted longer than I'd expected. Long enough for me to finish my water and refuse the dessert menu twice. Long enough for my mother to excuse herself to the ladies' room and return with fresh lipstick. Long enough for me to convince myself that this was the end of everything Marcus and I had built together. When they finally returned to the table, my father's expression had changed. The satisfaction was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like confusion. Marcus slid back into his seat beside me, his hand immediately finding mine under the table. "Everything all right?" Mother asked, looking between them. "Fine," my father said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Just clearing the air." Marcus squeezed my hand gently. "I think we should go," he said. "It's been a long day, and we both have work tomorrow." We said our goodbyes with the kind of stilted politeness that follows a family disaster. My father shook Marcus's hand again, but there was something different in his demeanor now. Less triumphant, more uncertain. The drive back to Marcus's apartment was silent, except for the rain against the windshield, and the soft jazz playing on the radio. I stared out the passenger window watching the city lights blur past, wondering how to begin the conversation that would end everything. "I should have told you," I said finally, as we pulled into his parking garage. "Yes," he agreed quietly, "you should have." We rode the elevator to his floor in silence, the weight of unspoken words pressing down on us like a physical thing. Inside his apartment, I went straight to the kitchen and started clearing away the dinner I'd prepared hours earlier, needing something to do with my hands. "Leave it," Marcus said from the doorway. "We need to talk." I set down the plate I'd been holding and turned to face him. He'd taken off his jacket and loosened his tie, but he still looked every inch the detective, all careful observation and patient questioning. "What did he tell you out there?" I asked. "That you were dangerous, that you'd lied to me about who you really were, that any smart man would run as far and as fast as possible before you destroyed his life the way you'd destroyed everything else you'd ever touched." The words hit me like physical blows, each one confirming my worst fears about what my father thought of me. "And what did you tell him?" Marcus moved closer, his steps deliberate and slow. "I told him that 5 years ago, Detective Luis Ramirez and I worked a robbery case in Beaverton, a convenience store on Canyon Road. The perpetrator was a white male, approximately 5'10", with a spider tattoo on his left hand. He was never caught." My breath caught in my throat. "Marcus." "I told him that during our investigation, we arrested the wrong person, a young woman who'd been in the store just before the robbery, who matched the general description given by a panicked clerk in poor lighting. I told him that she spent 3 terrifying days in jail before we realized our mistake and found security footage that proved her innocent." He was standing directly in front of me now, close enough that I could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes, close enough to count the faint lines that appeared when he smiled. "I told him that I've known exactly who you were since the first day we met, and that I fell in love with the strongest, bravest woman I've ever known. Someone who survived something terrible and built a beautiful life anyway." The tears I'd been holding back for hours finally spilled over, running down my cheeks in hot streams. "You knew? This whole time you knew?" "I recognized you immediately. You haven't changed that much in 5 years, Zoe. I've been waiting for you to trust me enough to tell me yourself. Why didn't you say anything?" He reached up and gently wiped away my tears with his thumbs. "Because I wanted you to know that I love you for who you are now, not in spite of what happened to you then. I wanted you to believe that your past doesn't define your worth." I collapsed against him then, all the fear and tension of the evening, of the past 5 years finally leaving my body. He held me while I cried, his arms steady and warm around me, his voice soft in my ear as he whispered words of comfort and love. "I was so scared," I sobbed against his chest. "I was so scared that if you knew, you'd leave. Everyone else always leaves." "I'm not everyone else," he said firmly, "and I'm not going anywhere." We stood there in his kitchen for a long time, holding each other while the rain continued to fall against the windows and the city hummed with life below us. For the first time in 5 years, I felt truly safe. Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually safe in a way I'd forgotten was possible. "What happens now?" I asked finally, pulling back to look at his face. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Now we plan a wedding," he said simply, "and we live our lives. And your father learns that he doesn't get to control your happiness anymore. He won't give up easily. He's been trying to destroy my relationship since I was in high school. He thinks he's protecting me, but really he's just protecting his image. Having a daughter who was arrested, even wrongfully, doesn't fit with his idea of the perfect family." Marcus was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "What if I told you that your father has secrets of his own, things that might make him think twice about trying to sabotage our relationship?" "What do you mean?" "I mean that when you've been a cop for 8 years, you learn things about people, you develop instincts about who's hiding what. And your father, Zoe, is definitely hiding something." I pulled back to study his face. "Are you saying you think my father has done something illegal?" "I'm saying that people who are that desperate to control their family's image, who go to such lengths to destroy their daughter's happiness, usually have something they're trying to protect. Something that would be a lot more damaging than a wrongful arrest that was dismissed 5 years ago." The idea that my father, Richard Brennan, pillar of the Lake Oswego community and successful businessman, might have secrets of his own was both thrilling and terrifying. For so long he'd held my past over me like a sword, using my moment of vulnerability as leverage to control my choices. The possibility that he might be vulnerable too, that there might be something that could level the playing field between us, was almost too much to hope for. "What do we do?" I asked. Marcus smiled, and for the first time all evening, it reached his eyes. "We find out what Richard Brennan doesn't want the world to know, and then we make sure he understands that if he ever tries to hurt you again, he'll have a lot more to worry about than his daughter's ancient arrest record." Outside, the rain was finally beginning to slow, and through the clouds, I could see the faint glimmer of stars. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations, and probably new attempts by my father to sabotage the happiness I'd found with Marcus. But tonight, for the first time in 5 years, I wasn't facing those challenges alone. Tonight, I had someone in my corner who knew all my secrets and loved me anyway. Someone who'd been protecting me long before I even knew I needed protection. Someone who was ready to fight for us with the same determination my father had always used to tear us apart. The breaking point hadn't broken me after all. It had just cleared the way for something stronger to take its place. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, typical for October in Portland. I woke up in Marcus's bed with the kind of clarity that only comes after a storm has passed. Sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains, casting soft patterns across the hardwood floor, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe properly. Marcus was already up, standing by the window with a cup of coffee in his hands, still wearing the t-shirt and boxers he'd slept in. His hair was messy from sleep, and there was something peaceful about the way he watched the city wake up below us. When he noticed I was awake, he turned with that soft smile that made my heart skip. "Morning, beautiful. Coffee's ready when you are." I stretched, feeling muscles relax that had been tense for longer than I'd realized. "What time is it?" 7:30. I called in and told them I'd be late today. Figured we both needed some time to process everything. The events of the previous evening came flooding back, but instead of the usual panic that accompanied thoughts of my father's interference, I felt something different. Relief. Maybe. Or determination. For the first time in 5 years, someone knew my story and was still here. Still choosing me. I padded to the kitchen in one of Marcus's oversized Police Academy t-shirts, accepting the mug he offered me. The coffee was strong and perfect, exactly the way I liked. He'd learned my preferences months ago and never forgotten them, one of the hundreds of small ways he showed he paid attention. "So," I said, settling onto one of the bar stools at his kitchen island, "last night you mentioned that my father might have secrets of his own. Were you serious about that? Or were you just trying to make me feel better?" Marcus leaned against the counter across from me, his expression shifting into what I'd come to recognize as his detective mode. More focused, analytical, like he was assembling pieces of a puzzle in his mind. I was serious. "Look, Zoe, I've been doing this job for 8 years. I've interrogated hundreds of people, from scared teenagers caught shoplifting, to hardened criminals who've spent decades perfecting their lies. Your father triggered every one of my instincts last night." "What do you mean?" The way he presented that information about your arrest. It wasn't just a concerned father sharing difficult news, it was calculated, strategic. He had that folder prepared, probably for months. He chose the most expensive restaurant in Lake Oswego to make sure you'd feel trapped, unable to make a scene. He waited until we were comfortable, until we'd ordered and eaten, before dropping the bomb. I sipped my coffee, thinking about this. That does sound like him. Richard Brennan doesn't do anything without a plan. Exactly, but here's the thing that bothered me most. When I told him I already knew about your arrest, when I explained that I was one of the detectives who cleared your name, he didn't react the way an innocent person would. How should he have reacted? Marcus set down his mug and moved closer, his voice taking on the patient tone he used when explaining complex cases. An innocent person, a normal father who'd just learned that his daughter's fiancé was the detective who proved her innocence, would have been relieved, grateful, even. He would have apologized for doubting you, maybe thanked me for helping clear your name. But that's not what happened. No, instead, he got defensive. Angry. He started asking questions about the case, about what other evidence we'd found, about whether there were any ongoing investigations related to that robbery. Those aren't the questions of someone who just wants to protect his daughter. Those are the questions of someone who's worried about what else might be discovered. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. You think he knows something about the real robber? I think your father knows more about that night than he's ever let on. And I think that's why he's so desperate to keep you isolated, to make sure you don't get too close to anyone who might start asking the right questions. The implications of what Marcus was suggesting hit me like a physical blow. For 5 years I'd carried the shame and trauma of that arrest, the knowledge that my father saw me as damaged goods because of something that wasn't even my fault. The idea that he might have been connected to the actual crime, that my suffering might have been protecting him somehow, made my stomach turn. What do we do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. We start digging, carefully, quietly, but thoroughly. I still have access to the case files from that robbery. I can review everything we collected, look for connections we might have missed, and you can help by telling me everything you remember about that night, and about your father's behavior in the weeks leading up to. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to think back to that terrible period. October 2019. I'd been 27, working as a freelance graphic designer, struggling to make ends meet in an expensive city. I'd been living in a tiny studio apartment in southeast Portland, the kind of place where you could hear your neighbors' conversations through the thin walls. I'd been having money problems, I said slowly. Nothing dramatic, just the usual freelancer feast or famine cycle. I'd had a couple of clients pay late, and I was behind on rent. I remember calling my parents and asking if I could borrow $1,000, just until my next project payment came through. What did your father say? He said no. Said it would be good for me to learn to handle my own financial responsibilities. But then, a few days later, he called and said he'd changed his mind. He gave me cash, $2,000, and told me to consider it an early birthday present. Marcus was taking notes now, his pen moving quickly across a small notebook he'd pulled from a kitchen drawer. Do you remember when exactly he gave you that money? October 15. I remember because it was exactly 2 weeks before my birthday, and I thought it was weird that he'd mentioned it being early. My father isn't the type to give spontaneous gifts, and the robbery happened on October 20th. 5 days later, I felt sick thinking about the timeline. Marcus, you don't think? I think we need more information before we start drawing conclusions. But the timing is interesting. He set down his pen and looked at me seriously. Zoe, I need you to think carefully about this next question. In the days after your father gave you that money, did he ask you to do anything specific? Go anywhere? Meet anyone? Run any errands for him? I racked my brain, trying to remember details from a period I'd spent years trying to forget. He asked me to pick up some paperwork from his accountant's office. It was in Beaverton, not far from where the robbery happened. I remember thinking it was strange because he usually handled his own business affairs, never asked me to run errands for him. Marcus's pen started moving again. Do you remember the address? Canyon Plaza, I think. It was in a strip mall with a Starbucks and a dry cleaner. The convenience store where I was arrested was in the same complex. We stared at each other across the kitchen island, the implications hanging heavy between us. My father had given me unexpected cash, then sent me to the exact location where a robbery would occur 5 days later. When I was arrested, he'd been more concerned about the family's reputation than about my well-being. And now, 5 years later, he was still trying to use that arrest to control my life. There's something else, I said, my voice shaking slightly. After I was released, after the charges were dropped, I tried to talk to him about what had happened. I was traumatized, Mark. I'd never been arrested before, never even had a parking ticket. 3 days in jail, even though I was innocent. It was the worst experience of my life. What did he say? He told me to forget about it, said the best thing I could do was put it behind me and never mention it again. He said if I kept talking about it, people would start to wonder if maybe I really was guilty. He convinced me that staying quiet was the only way to protect myself. Marcus's jaw tightened, and I could see anger building behind his carefully controlled expression. He isolated you, made you feel like you couldn't trust anyone with the truth, couldn't seek support or therapy to process what you'd been through. And it worked. For 5 years I've been carrying this alone, terrified that anyone who knew the truth would see me differently. Even when we started dating, even when I fell in love with you, I couldn't bring myself to take the risk, because he'd programmed you to believe that your past made you unworthy of love. The truth of that statement hit me like a punch to the chest. My father hadn't just failed to protect me during the worst period of my life, he'd actively made it worse. He'd used my trauma as a tool to control me, to keep me dependent on his approval, and afraid to form meaningful connections with anyone else. I want to know what really happened, I said, surprising myself with the strength in my voice. I want to know if he's connected to this, and if he is, I want him to face consequences for what he's done to me. Marcus reached across the island and took my hand. Are you sure? Once we start pulling this thread, we can't unknow what we might find. If your father is involved in that robbery, if he let you get arrested to protect himself, it's going to change everything about your family dynamic. I thought about my mother, quiet and elegant, who'd sat silently at dinner while my father destroyed my relationship. I thought about my brother Dylan, who'd stopped calling me regularly after the arrest, who'd gradually distanced himself from me over the past 5 years. I thought about family gatherings where I was tolerated rather than welcomed, where my achievements were dismissed, and my struggles ignored. Maybe it's time for things to change, I said. Maybe it's time for the truth to come out. Whatever it is. Marcus squeezed my hand. Okay, but we do this the right way, by the book with proper evidence and documentation. If we're going to take on Richard Brennan, we need to be absolutely certain of our facts. Where do we start? I start by pulling the case files and reviewing every piece of evidence we collected. You start by writing down everything you can remember about that time period, every conversation with your father, every request he made, every detail that seemed strange or out of character, and then we compare notes and see what patterns emerge. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of activity. Marcus called his partner Luis and arranged to meet him at the precinct to review the old case files. I settled at Marcus's dining table with my laptop and a legal pad, forcing myself to relive a period I'd spent 5 years trying to forget. The details came back slowly, painfully, the stress I'd been under about money, the relief when my father offered help, followed by confusion about why he'd changed his mind so suddenly, the awkward errand to the accountant's office, where I'd waited in a small lobby for 20 minutes, while they located paperwork that should have been ready for pickup. I remembered the accountant, a nervous man in his 60s who'd kept glancing toward the back office and apologizing for the delay. When he'd finally handed me the manila envelope, he'd seemed eager to get me out of the office as quickly as possible. I wrote down everything I could remember about the night of the robbery itself. I'd gone to the convenience store around 9 p.m., planning to buy dinner and a bottle of wine. The store had been nearly empty except for the clerk, a young guy who'd seemed distracted and jumped. I'd picked up a frozen dinner and a cheap bottle of Pinot Grigio, paid with cash from the money my father had given me, and left. 20 minutes later, I'd been pulled over 6 blocks away. The police had been looking for a robbery suspect, and my general description had matched the sparse details they'd been given. Dark hair, medium height, wearing jeans and a dark jacket. In the poor lighting and chaos of the moment, it had been enough to ruin my life. By the time Marcus returned from the precinct, I had 12 pages of handwritten notes and a timeline that made my stomach churn. He looked grim as he walked through the door, carrying a thick file folder and wearing the expression he got when a case was more complicated than it had initially appeared. "What did you find?" I asked. He set the folder on the dining table next to my notes and pulled out a chair. "More questions than answers, but some interesting patterns. First, the good news. I reviewed all the evidence from your case, and there's absolutely nothing that suggests you were involved in that robbery. The security footage that cleared you was definitive. You were in the store at 9:07 p.m., made your purchase, and left. The robbery occurred at 9:31 p.m., so I definitely couldn't have done it. Definitely not. But here's where it gets interesting. The real perpetrator was caught on camera, but the image quality was poor. All we could determine was approximate height and build, and one distinctive feature. What feature? Marcus pulled out a grainy black and white photograph, a tattoo on his left hand. We could just make out part of it, but it wasn't enough to identify him through the tattoo database. I studied the image, squinting at the blurry figure reaching across the counter. Have you ever seen this tattoo before? No, but I've seen plenty like it. It's part of a spider design, probably covers most of the back of the hand. Pretty distinctive work, the kind of thing you'd remember if you saw it again. Did you ever find the guy who actually did it? No. The case went cold after a few weeks. We followed up on every lead, interviewed everyone who'd been in the area that night, but we never identified the actual perpetrator. He seemed to just vanish. I felt a familiar frustration building. So he's out there somewhere, probably robbing other stores, while I spent 5 years thinking I was somehow responsible for what happened. Zoe, you were never responsible, not even a little bit. You were a victim of circumstance, and then a victim of your father's manipulation. Marcus pulled out another sheet of paper, but I did find something interesting when I cross-referenced the case with other robberies in the area. What kind of something? 3 other convenience stores were robbed in the Portland metro area over the following 6 months. All had similar circumstances, same general physical description of the perpetrator, same method of operation, same distinctive tattoo, caught on security cameras. My heart sank. So he kept robbing stores after I was arrested. Yes, but here's the thing. All 3 of those stores were in areas where your father's dealerships had recently opened, or expanded. 2 in Gresham, 1 in Tigard, locations where Richard Brennan would have been doing business, meeting with contractors, spending time in the area. I stared at him, trying to process what he was suggesting. You think my father knew the real robber? I think it's possible, but I found something else that's even more interesting. Marcus pulled out a final document. I ran your father's name through our database, just to see if he'd ever been mentioned in any police reports, and he was. 3 times in the past 10 years, all noise complaints from neighbors about loud arguments at your family home, arguments that happened after midnight, involving your father and an unknown male voice. The neighbors described shouting, sounds of furniture being moved, and cars leaving at odd hours. I felt the blood drain from my face. When did these complaints happen? Marcus consulted his notes. June 2018, March 2020, and October 2023. The most recent one was just last year. Zoe, whatever's going on, it's still happening. October 2020 was 5 months after the robbery. Exactly. And according to the responding officer's notes, your father claimed he was having business disputes with former employees, said it was all perfectly legal, and asked the police not to return unless there was evidence of an actual crime. But the neighbors heard a second voice. And here's what really caught my attention. One of the neighbors, Mrs. Patterson, who lives next door to your parents, mentioned seeing a man leaving your father's house around 2 a.m. after one of these arguments. She described him as medium height, stocky build, with what looked like tattoos on his hands. The room felt like it was tilting around me. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady myself as the implications crashed over me. You think the man who robbed that store, the man whose crime got me arrested, has been meeting with my father for years? I think it's a strong possibility, and I think your father has been paying him, either for services rendered, or to keep him quiet about something. But what could my father possibly be involved in that would require him to work with armed robbers? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, organizing his thoughts. There are a few possibilities. Maybe your father needed someone to do jobs he couldn't be connected to. Maybe he needed someone eliminated as competition, or maybe he got involved with the wrong people and now he's being blackmailed. You're talking about my father like he's some kind of criminal mastermind. I'm talking about your father like he's a man who was desperate enough to let his own daughter get arrested rather than risk his own exposure. Whatever he's involved in, Zoe, it's serious enough that he's willing to destroy your life to protect it. I stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. The city looked normal below us, people going about their ordinary lives,
unaware that my entire understanding of my family was crumbling. This is insane. My father sells cars, he's on the Chamber of Commerce, he plays golf with the mayor, and he has secret midnight meetings with men who rob convenience stores. We don't know that for sure. Marcus joined me at the window, his reflection serious in the glass. No, we don't, but we have enough circumstantial evidence to warrant a deeper investigation. The question is, how far are you willing to go to find the truth? I thought about the past 5 years of my life, the relationships I'd avoided, because I felt too damaged to deserve love. The therapy I'd never sought, because my father convinced me that talking about my arrest would only make things worse. The career opportunities I'd turned down because I was afraid background checks would reveal my past. I thought about last night's dinner, the satisfaction on my father's face as he tried to destroy my relationship with Marcus, the casual cruelty with which he'd weaponized my trauma, turning the worst experience of my life into a tool for his own control. I want to know everything, I said firmly. I want to know what he's been hiding, who he's been meeting with, and why he was willing to let me suffer to protect himself. And if he's involved in criminal activity, I want him to face the consequences. Marcus nodded slowly. Then we keep digging, but careful. If your father really is connected to dangerous people, we need to make sure we don't tip him off before we have enough evidence to protect ourselves.
What's our next step? I talked to Luis about officially reopening the robbery case. New evidence has come to light. We want to take another look at potential suspects. That gives us legal cover to investigate without alerting your father that he's being looked at. And what do I do? You keep being his daughter. You don't change your behavior. Don't ask suspicious questions. Don't give him any reason to think you're investigating him. Can you do that? I thought about maintaining normal contact with my father, pretending everything was fine while we built a case against him. The idea made me feel sick, but I knew it was necessary. I can do it, but Marcus, what if we're wrong? What if this is all coincidence and we're destroying my family over nothing? He turned to face me fully, his hands gentle on my shoulders. Then we'll know we tried to find the truth, and we can move forward with clear consciences. But Zoe, I need you to prepare yourself for the possibility that we're right, that your father has been involved in criminal activity, and that he's been using your pain to cover his tracks for years. I know, I leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his presence. I just can't believe I'm even having this conversation. 6 months ago, my biggest worry was whether you'd like my friends when you met them. Now I'm planning to investigate my own father for armed robbery. Life has a way of taking unexpected turns. That's one way to put it. We spent the rest of the afternoon planning our approach. Marcus would work his official channels, reviewing evidence and looking for connections we'd missed the first time. I would maintain normal family contact while paying closer attention to my father's behavior, looking for signs of stress or unusual activity. We also discussed safety precautions. If my father really was involved with dangerous people, there was a chance that our investigation could put us at risk. Marcus insisted on changing the locks on my apartment and on his, and he taught me basic surveillance detection techniques in case anyone started following me. This feels like something out of a movie, I said as he showed me how to use store windows as mirrors to watch for people behind me. Real police work is usually a lot more boring than the movies make it look, he replied, but when it involves family, it can get complicated fast. As evening approached, I realized I needed to make a decision about dinner plans. My father would be expecting me to contact him about the previous night's revelation, probably assuming I'd be calling to break up with Marcus and apologize for wasting everyone's time. I should call him, I said reluctantly. If I don't, he'll get suspicious about why I'm not more upset. What are you going to tell him? That Marcus and I are taking some time to think things through. That I'm grateful he told Marcus the truth because honesty is important in a relationship. I'll let him think his plan is working. Marcus looked uncomfortable with the idea of me lying to my father, but he understood the necessity. Just be careful what you say. Don't give him any information he could use against you later. I made the call from Marcus's kitchen while he pretended to read the newspaper at the dining table. My father answered on the second ring, his voice warm with false concern. Zoe, sweetheart, I've been worried about you. How are you holding up? I've been better, Dad. Last night was pretty overwhelming. I'm sure it was. I hated having to be the one to tell Marcus about your past, but I thought he deserved to know what he was getting into. How did he take it? I forced myself to sound vulnerable and uncertain. He said he needs some time to process everything. We're going to talk more this weekend. Figure out what this means for our relationship. Oh, honey. His voice was perfectly pitched with paternal sympathy. I know this is hard, but you have to understand that I only did this because I care about you. A marriage built on secrets never works. I know, Dad. You were right to tell him. I should have been honest from the beginning. Well, what's done is, the important thing now is that you don't make any rash decisions. Take some time. Think things through. And remember, your mother and I are here for you, no matter what happens. Thanks, Dad. I should probably go. I have some work to catch up on. Of course, call me this weekend and let me know how your conversation goes. After I hung up, I felt like I needed a shower. The false sympathy in my father's voice, the way he'd positioned himself as my protector, while actively sabotaging my happiness, made my skin crawl. How do you think he sounded? Marcus asked. Satisfied. Like everything was going according to plan. I sat down heavily at the dining table. God, I can't believe I fell for his act for so many years. He's not protecting me. He's controlling me. Manipulation is insidious like that. It starts small and builds over time until you can't see it anymore. The fact that you're recognizing it now shows how strong you are. That evening, we ordered Thai food and spread all our evidence across Marcus's dining table. Photos, timelines, police reports, and my handwritten notes created a collage of circumstantial evidence that painted a disturbing picture of my father's secret life. Look at this pattern, Marcus said, pointing to the timeline we'd created. Every time there's been a major expense in your father's business, a new dealership opening or expansion, there's been some kind of incident in the following months. The convenience store robbery happened 2 months after he opened the Gresham location. The other robberies corresponded with his Teagard expansion. You think he's been funding his business growth with stolen money, or he's been using criminal contacts to eliminate competition. Think about it, Zoe. The car dealership business is incredibly competitive. If someone could guarantee that competing lots would have problems, break-ins, harassment, it would be worth a lot of money to someone like your father. I studied the map we'd created, with pins marking the locations of the robberies and the dates of my father's business activity. The correlation was undeniable. So what's our next move? Tomorrow I meet with Luis and we officially reopen the convenience store robbery case. I'll also start looking into any other crimes that might be connected to your father's business activity. You keep acting normal, but start paying attention to any unusual behavior. What kind of unusual behavior? Phone calls at odd hours, unexpected trips or meetings, changes in his routine, people showing up at the house who don't look like typical business associates. And if we find evidence that he's involved in criminal activity, Marcus met my eyes across the table, then we arrest him, no matter what it means for your family, no matter how it affects your relationship with your mother and brother. If Richard Brennan is a criminal, he needs to face justice. I nodded, understanding the weight of what we were undertaking, even if it destroys my family. Zoe, your father already destroyed your family when he chose his criminal associates over his daughter's well-being. We're just going to make sure the truth comes to light. As we cleaned up the evidence and prepared for bed, I felt a strange mixture of fear and anticipation. For 5 years I'd been living with the weight of a secret that wasn't even mine to carry. Tomorrow we would begin the process of uncovering the truth, no matter how painful it might be. I thought about the young woman in that mugshot, frightened and alone, convinced that her life was ruined forever. She couldn't have imagined that 5 years later, she'd be planning to investigate her own father with the help of the detective who'd saved her. She couldn't have known that her worst nightmare would eventually lead her to the love of her life and the strength to fight back against the people who'd wronged her. As I fell asleep in Marcus's arms, I whispered a promise to that scared girl in the orange jumpsuit. Tomorrow we would start getting justice for both of us. 3 days into our investigation, I was beginning to understand why people said that knowledge was a dangerous thing. Every phone call from my father felt like a performance. Every family interaction a careful dance around landmines I could now see but couldn't acknowledge. The hardest part wasn't pretending everything was normal. It was realizing how abnormal everything had always been. I was sitting in my graphic design studio on Thursday afternoon, working on a logo for a local nonprofit, when my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Lunch tomorrow? Haven't seen you since dinner Tuesday. Dad's concerned about you." The message felt loaded, like everything else in my family's communication patterns. Now that I was paying attention, I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back. "Sure, Mom. Usual place? The Garden Cafe. At noon. Love you." The Garden Cafe was my mother's favorite restaurant, a quiet spot in Lake Oswego where she met her book club friends and conducted what she called important conversation. It was also public enough that neither of us would be likely to make a scene, which meant she was planning to discuss something significant. I called Marcus, who was at the precinct following up on the case files. "My mother wants to have lunch tomorrow. She says my father is concerned about me." That was fast. "I guess he's more worried about your reaction than he let on." "What do you think she wants?" "Probably to gauge how much damage control they need to do. Your father's used to being in control of family situations, and your calm reaction to his bombshell probably has him wondering what you're really thinking." I could hear papers shuffling in the background, the general bustle of a police station. "Have you found anything new?" Luis and I spent the morning going through old case files, looking for any other crimes that might connect to your father's business activities. "We found something interesting, but I'd rather discuss it in person tonight." "Good news or bad news?" "Complicated news. The kind that raises more questions than it answers." After we hung up, I found it impossible to concentrate on work. Every logo I designed looked sinister. Every color choice seemed to hide secret meaning. I finally gave up and decided to drive past my parents' house, telling myself I was just going for a coffee but knowing I wanted to observe the place with fresh eyes. The house I'd grown up in sat on a quiet street, lined with mature oak trees, their autumn leaves creating a carpet of gold and red across the sidewalks. It was a beautiful neighborhood, the kind of place where nothing bad was supposed to happen. The house itself was a two-story colonial with cream-colored siding and hunter green shutters, perfectly maintained and completely unremarkable. I parked across the street and studied the property, trying to imagine late-night meetings and criminal conspiracies taking place behind those familiar walls. The garage door was closed, but I could see my father's Mercedes and my mother's Lexus in the driveway. Everything looked normal, peaceful even. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Parked 2 houses down, partially hidden behind a landscaping truck, was a dark pickup truck with tinted windows. The truck itself wasn't unusual for the neighborhood, but the man sitting in the driver's seat was. Even from a distance, I could see he was watching my parents' house, and when he noticed me looking at him, he started the engine and drove away. I sat in my car for another 20 minutes, but the truck didn't return. Still, the encounter left me shaken. Was I being paranoid, or was someone really watching my family? And if so, were they watching because of our investigation, or because of whatever my father was involved in? That evening, Marcus and I met at a small Italian restaurant in the Hawthorne district, far enough from both our neighborhoods to ensure privacy. He looked tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from spending hours sifting through evidence and trying to make sense of incomplete information. "You look like you've had a long day," I said, sliding into the booth across from him. "I have, but a productive one." He pulled out a small notebook and flipped to a page covered in his careful handwriting. "Luis and I found 3 more cases that might be connected to your father's business activities. More robberies, 1 robbery, 1 case of arson and 1 assault, all within a 50-mile radius of Portland, all during time periods when your father was expanding his business operations." I felt my appetite disappear completely. "Tell me about the arson." March 2021. A small car lot in Hillsborough owned by a man named Gary Chen. He specialized in used imports, direct competition for your father's new location that had opened 6 months earlier. The fire was ruled suspicious but unsolved. Chen lost everything, had to sell the property to pay off his debts. And the assault, June, a man named Robert Torres,
who owned a parts supply business that had been underbidding your father's preferred suppliers. Torres was attacked in his own parking lot, beaten severely enough to require hospitalization. He refused to cooperate with the investigation, said he didn't see his attacker clearly. Did he have any distinctive features? The attacker, Marcus, consulted his notes. Torres mentioned that the man had extensive tattoos on his hands, but he claimed he couldn't describe them in detail. Said the attack happened too fast. I set down my water glass with trembling fingers. It's the same person, the man who robbed the convenience store, the one who's been meeting with my father. He's been eliminating my father's competition. That's what we think too, but we need more than circumstantial evidence to prove it. What about the truck I saw today? Someone was watching my parents' house. Marcus's expression sharpened. Described the truck. Dark-colored, maybe black or dark blue, tinted windows. The driver was a white male, maybe in his 40s. When he saw me looking at him, he drove away. Did you get a license plate? No. I was too far away. But Marcus, what if they know we're investigating? What if my father figured out that we're not just processing the information from Tuesday night? It's possible. Or it could be that your father has other problems he's dealing with. If he's been using criminal contacts to eliminate competition, there's always a chance that those contacts could turn on him. The waiter approached our table, clearly expecting us to order, but neither of us had even looked at our menus. Marcus ordered pasta for both of us, and I didn't bother to correct him. Food was the last thing on my mind. There's something else, Marcus said once the waiter had left. Luis ran a financial analysis on your father's business records, the ones that are public anyway. His expansion pattern doesn't match his reported income. What do you mean? Your father has opened 4 new dealerships in the past 3 years, at a total cost of approximately $12 million. His tax returns show a successful business, but not successful enough to support that level of expansion without significant loans or Maybe he has investors he hasn't disclosed. Maybe, or maybe he's been funding his expansion with money from criminal activities. The timeline matches perfectly. Every time he's needed capital for a new location, there's been a crime in the area that would have benefited his business. I pushed the salad around on my plate, unable to eat. So what you're saying is that my father hasn't just been covering up crimes, he's been commissioning them. I'm saying it's a strong possibility. And if that's true, then the man who robbed that convenience store, the man whose crime got you arrested, was working for your father. The full implications of what Marcus was suggesting hit me like a physical blow. Not only had my father allowed me to be arrested for a crime I didn't commit, he had actually ordered the crime that led to my arrest. My suffering hadn't been collateral damage in his schemes. It had been a direct result of his action. I think I'm going to be sick, I said, pushing back from the table. Zoe, we don't know for sure yet. This is still largely circumstantial evidence. But you believe it's true. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Yeah, I believe your father has been using criminal associates to eliminate business competition, and that the robbery you were arrested for was part of that pattern. I believe he's been funding his business expansion with proceeds from criminal activity. And I believe that when I was arrested, he saw an opportunity to keep me quiet and under his control by making me ashamed of something that was actually his fault. That's consistent with the pattern of behavior you've described. I excused myself to the bathroom, needing a moment to process what we'd discovered. Standing in front of the mirror, I barely recognized the woman looking back at me. 3 days ago, I'd been someone who was afraid of her past, someone who carried shame that didn't belong to her. Now I was someone who was actively investigating her own family, someone who was discovering that her father might be a criminal. When I returned to the table, Marcus had already paid the check and was waiting for me with a concerned expression. I'm sorry, I said. This is just a lot to process. You don't need to apologize. Anyone would be overwhelmed by this kind of information. What do we do now? We keep building the case. Tomorrow you have lunch with your mother, and you listen carefully to what she said. People who are married to criminals often know more than they let on, even if they don't admit it to themselves. You think my mother knows about my father's criminal activities? I think your mother has been married to Richard Brennan for 35 years. She's seen his business practices, his associates, his methods of dealing with problems. She may not know specific details, but she probably knows that something isn't right. The drive back to my apartment was quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts. The city looked different now, less safe and predictable. Every shadow seemed to hide potential threats. Every stranger might be connected to my father's criminal network. As Marcus walked me to my door, I realized how much my life had changed in just a few days. A week ago, my biggest worry had been whether my parents would approve of my wedding plans. Now I was afraid they might try to have Marcus and me killed if they discovered we were investigating them. "I don't know if I can do this," I said, as we reached my front. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to keep pretending everything is normal while we build a case against my own father." Marcus pulled me close, his arms warm and steady around me. "You're stronger than you know. You've been surviving your father's manipulation for years, and you've built a good life despite his efforts to control you. You can do this." "What if we're wrong? What if we destroy my family and it turns out we were mistaken about everything? Then we'll deal with the consequences." "But Zoe, what if we're right, and we do nothing? What if your father continues to use criminal associates to eliminate competition? What if other innocent people get hurt because we were too afraid to seek justice?" I knew he was right, but that didn't make the situation any easier. "Will you come with me tomorrow, to lunch with my mother?" "I don't think that's a good idea. If your parents are suspicious about our investigation, showing up together might confirm their fears. You need to go alone, act natural and see what information you can gather." "I'm scared, Marcus. I'm scared of what I might learn about my family, and I'm scared of what they might do if they find out we're investigating them." "I know, but we're going to be careful, and we're going to do this the right way. If your father is involved in criminal activities, he needs to face justice, and if he's not, then we'll have peace of mind knowing we did our due diligence." Friday morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of Pacific Northwest weather that seemed to match my mood perfectly. I spent an hour getting ready for lunch with my mother, trying to strike the right balance between looking put together and appearing appropriately stressed about my relationship situation. The garden cafe was busy when I arrived, filled with the usual mix of business lunches and social gatherings. I spotted my mother immediately, sitting at a corner table with a clear view of the entrance. She was wearing a cream-colored sweater and her favorite pearl necklace, her blonde hair styled in its usual perfect waves. "Zoe, sweetheart," she said, rising to embrace me, "you look tired. Are you sleeping well?" "Not really," I admitted, which was true enough. "This whole situation with Marcus has been keeping me up at night." We ordered our usual salads and iced teas, making small talk about the weather and the restaurant's new fall menu. But I could see the tension in my mother's shoulders, the way she kept glancing around the room as if checking to see who might be listening to our conversation. "Your father is very worried about you," she said, finally, once our food had arrived. "He's afraid that you're making a mistake by staying with Marcus after learning about his reaction to your past." "What do you mean, his reaction?" "Well, the fact that he needs time to think about whether he can accept what happened to you. Any man who truly loved you would have immediately assured you that your past doesn't matter." I felt a familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach, the same feeling I'd had countless times over the years when my parents had subtly undermined my relationship. "Marcus said he needs time to process the information. That seems reasonable to me, does it? Or are you just telling yourself that because you're afraid of being alone?" The question stung, partly because it echoed fears I'd carried for years. "I'm not afraid of being alone, Mom. I'm afraid of giving up on something good because of pressure from people who don't want me to be happy." My mother's expression sharpened. "That's not fair, Zoe. Your father and I only want what's best for you. We've seen how you get attached to people who aren't right for you, and we've watched you get hurt over and over again. Name one person I've dated who wasn't right for me." "Well, there was David in college. He was clearly only interested in your trust fund." "I don't have a trust fund. And James, who was obviously using you to get connections in the art world." "James was a high school teacher. What connections could I possibly have provided?"
My mother waved her hand dismissively. The point is, you have a pattern of choosing men who take advantage of you. Your father has more experience with these things. What kind of experience? Business experience. He knows how to read people, how to tell when someone has ulterior motive. I set down my fork, studying my mother's face. Mom, how long have you known about my arrest? Since it happened, of course. Your father told me immediately. And you never thought to ask me about it? Never wondered how I was dealing with the trauma of being wrongfully accused. Your father said it was best not to discuss it. He said talking about it would only make you feel worse. He said that, or you agreed with him. My mother looked uncomfortable, shifting in her seat. I trusted your father's judgment. He's always been better at handling difficult situations. What kind of difficult situations? Business problems, mostly. Your father has always had to deal with difficult people in his industry. Competitors who played dirty, suppliers who try to cheat him. He's learned how to protect our family from that kind of trouble. I felt my pulse quicken. What do you mean, protect our family? Well, he makes sure that people who try to harm our interests face consequences. He has connections, people who can help him solve problems. What kind of people? My mother seemed to realize she'd said too much. I don't know the details. Your father doesn't discuss his business methods with me. But I know that sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. Mom, are you telling me that you know Dad uses questionable methods to deal with business problems? I'm telling you that your father is a successful businessman who knows how to handle people who try to take advantage of him. That's not the same thing as questionable methods. But her voice lacked conviction, and I could see doubt in her eyes. She knew something was wrong with my father's business practices, even if she'd never admitted it to herself. Has Dad ever asked you not to discuss his business with other people? Of course. All successful businessmen prefer to keep their methods private. That's just good sense. Has he ever had meetings at home late at night? Meetings with people you didn't recognize? My mother's face went pale. Why are you asking these questions? Because I'm trying to understand why my father was so determined to destroy my relationship with Marcus, and I'm starting to think it has less to do with protecting me and more to do with protecting himself. Zoe, that's a terrible thing to say about your father. Is it? Or is it finally the truth? My mother stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I think this conversation has gone far enough. Your father loves you, and everything he's done has been to protect you. If you can't see that, then maybe Marcus isn't the problem. She left $40 on the table and walked out without another word, leaving me sitting alone with half-eaten salads, and the growing certainty that my family was hiding something far worse than I'd imagined. I sat in the restaurant for another 20 minutes, replaying the conversation in my mind, my mother's defensive reactions, her careful non-answers, her admission that my father had connections, who could help him solve problems. She might not know the specific details of my father's criminal activities, but she knew enough to be afraid of discussing them. When I finally left the restaurant, I felt eyes on me as I walked to my car. I turned around twice, but didn't see anyone obviously watching me. Still, the feeling persisted as I drove home, and I found myself taking a longer route, making several unnecessary turns to see if anyone was following me. At home, I called Marcus and told him about the lunch conversation. He listened without interrupting, occasionally asking clarifying questions about my mother's exact words and reactions. She knows something, he said when I finished. She may not know specifics, but she knows your father is involved in questionable activity. She seemed scared when I started pushing for details. She probably is scared. If your father is involved with dangerous people, she's in a vulnerable position. She's dependent on him financially, and she's probably afraid of what might happen if she says too much. So what do we do now? We keep building the case. Louis and I are meeting with the DA's office on Monday to discuss possibly reopening several cases. If we can establish a pattern of criminal activity connected to your father's business, we'll have grounds for a more formal investigation. And if my father finds out what we're doing, then we'll deal with that when it happens. But Zoe, I need you to promise me that you'll be careful. If your father is desperate enough to use criminal associates to eliminate business competition, he might be desperate enough to try to stop our investigation. You think he'd hurt me? I think he's already hurt you by letting you get arrested for a crime he commissioned. I don't want to find out what else he's capable of. That evening, I double-checked all the locks on my apartment and drew all the curtains. I felt paranoid and ridiculous, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Every car that drove past my building seemed suspicious. Every footstep in the hallway made me jump. Around 10 p.m., my phone rang. The caller ID showed my father's number, and I debated whether to answer it. Finally, I picked up on the fourth ring. Hello, Dad. Zoe, your mother told me about your conversation today. I'm very disappointed in you. I'm disappointed too, disappointed that you've been lying to me for years. I've never lied to you. Everything I've done has been to protect you and our family. Protect us from what? From people who would use your past against you. From people who would take advantage of your trusting nature. From people who don't have your best interests at heart. People like Marcus? People like Marcus? Yeah. Do you really think it's a coincidence that you're engaged to a police detective? Don't you think it's strange that he's shown so much interest in your family? What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that Marcus Sullivan has been asking questions about my business, my associates, my financial records. Your loving fiancé has been investigating your family. I felt my blood run cold. That's not true, isn't it? Ask him about his visits to the precinct records department. Ask him about his meetings with Detective Ramirez. Ask him about the files he's been reviewing. How do you know about that? I know because I have friends in the police department, friends who keep me informed about investigations that might affect my family. Dad, if you have nothing to hide, then you shouldn't be worried about police investigations. Everyone has something to hide. Zoe, everyone has made mistakes. They'd rather forget. The question is whether you're going to let Marcus destroy our family to advance his own career. His career? Think about it. A detective who brings down a successful businessman makes headlines, gets promotions, gets recognition. Is that really the kind of man you want to marry? I ended the call without responding, my hands shaking as I set the phone down. My father knew about our investigation. He had sources in the police department who were feeding him information about Marcus's activities, and he was trying to turn me against Marcus by making me doubt his motives. But his tactics had backfired. Instead of making me suspicious of Marcus, my father's call had confirmed everything we'd suspected. He was involved in criminal activities. He had corrupt contacts in the police department, and he was desperate enough to try to manipulate me into stopping our investigation. I called Marcus immediately. We have a problem. My father knows we're investigating him. How? He has sources in the police department. He knows about your meetings with Louise, about the files you've been reviewing, and he's trying to convince me that you're only investigating him to advance your own career. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. That's not entirely unexpected. There are always people in the department who are willing to sell information for the right price. So what do? We accelerate our timeline. If your father knows we're investigating him, he'll either try to destroy evidence or eliminate the threats to his operation. We need to get enough evidence to make arrests before he can do either. Marcus, I'm scared. If he's desperate enough to have sources in the police department, what else is he capable of? I don't know, but I'm not going to let anything happen to you. Pack a bag and come stay with me until we can figure out how to handle this. What about my work, my client? Your safety is more important than your clients. Pack a bag, and I'll come pick you up. As I threw clothes into an overnight bag, I thought about how much my life had changed in just 1 week. 7 days ago, I'd been planning a wedding and worrying about normal things like guest lists and flower arrangements. Now I was fleeing my own apartment because my father might be dangerous. But I wasn't the same person who'd been arrested 5 years ago, frightened and alone, and convinced that her life was over. I was stronger now, and I wasn't facing this alone. I had Marcus, and I had the truth on my side. My father had spent years using my shame and fear to control me. He'd made me believe that my past made me unworthy of love, that I needed to be grateful for any scraps of affection he chose to give me. But now I knew that my past wasn't something to be ashamed of. It was something that had been done to me, not something I had done, and I was done being his victim. The safe house was a modest 2-bedroom apartment in southeast Portland, the kind of place the police department used for witnesses who needed temporary protection. Marcus had arranged it through channels he trusted, bypassing the usual bureaucratic processes that might have alerted my father's sources within the department. The walls were beige, the furniture was functional, and everything smelled faintly of industrial cleaning supply. I'd been there for 3 days, and I was going stir-crazy. I can't live like this, I said, pacing from the small kitchen to the living room window for the 100th time that morning. I'm a prisoner in my own life because of my father's crime. Marcus looked up from his laptop, where he'd been reviewing case files and coordinating with the district attorney's office. It's temporary. Once we have enough evidence to make arrests, you'll be able to go home. When will that be? Soon. The DA agreed to fast-track the investigation given the circumstances. We have a grand jury hearing scheduled for next week. I stopped pacing and stared at him. A grand jury hearing? You mean we're actually going to indict my father? If the evidence supports it, yeah. We have enough circumstantial evidence to suggest a pattern of criminal activity, and your father's reaction to our investigation suggests consciousness of guilt. What if the grand jury doesn't indict? Then we keep investigating until we have enough evidence to convince them. But Zoe, I think you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that this is going to get a lot more complicated before it gets better. What do you mean? Marcus closed his laptop and gave me his full attention. Your father has been operating a criminal enterprise for years. He has corrupt contacts in the police department, connections to violent criminals, and a lot of money at stake. People like that don't just roll over when they're threatened. You think he's going to try to stop us? I think he's going to try everything he can to protect himself, and that might include trying to discredit our investigation or intimidate witnesses. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my brother Dylan, who I hadn't heard from in months. Family meeting tonight, Dad's house, 7 p.m. Important. I showed the message to Marcus, who frowned as he read it. That's not a coincidence. Your father is gathering the family to present a united front. Should I go? Absolutely not. If your father knows we're investigating him, that meeting could be dangerous for you. But what if he's planning something? What if he's going to try to hurt other people in my family? Then we'll handle it through official channels. But you're not going to walk into a trap just because your father commanded you to. I knew Marcus was right, but the idea of my family meeting without me felt wrong. For all their faults, they were still my family, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was abandoning them by staying away. What if I called Dylan, just to find out what the meeting is about? You can try, but be careful what you say. If your father is listening to your phone calls, anything you say could be used against you. I dialed Dylan's number, my heart pounding as I waited for him to answer. My younger brother had always been the family peacemaker, the one who tried to stay out of conflicts and keep everyone happy, but he'd also been distant since my arrest, as if he wasn't sure what to make of having a sister with a criminal record. Zoe, where are you? Mom and Dad are worried. I'm fine, Dylan. I'm safe. What's this meeting about? Dad says Marcus has been spreading lies about our family. He says Marcus is trying to destroy Dad's business to make himself look good. And you believe that? I don't know what to believe anymore. Dad showed me some documents that suggest Marcus has been investigating our family for months, long before you two started dating. I felt a chill run down my spine. What kind of documents? Police reports, financial records, surveillance photos. It looks like Marcus targeted you specifically because you're Dad's daughter. Dylan, that's not true. Marcus and I met by accident. I spilled coffee on him at a coffee shop. Did you? Or did he arrange to be there because he knew you'd be there? The doubt in my brother's voice was like a knife to my heart. My father was poisoning my family against me, using carefully constructed lies to make them believe that Marcus was the villain in this situation. Dylan, I need you to listen to me. Dad is involved in criminal activity. He's been using violent criminals to eliminate his business competition,
and he's been covering it up for years. That's insane. Zoe, Dad's a car dealer, not a gangster. Then explain the late-night meetings. Explain the men with tattoos who come to the house. Explain how he's been able to afford 4 new dealerships in 3 years. I don't know what you're talking about, because you haven't been paying attention. Because you've been trusting Dad to handle everything while you focused on your own life. And you think I should trust Marcus instead? A man who's been lying to you since the day you met. Marcus hasn't been lying to me. He's been protecting me. From what? From the truth about what Dad did to me. From the knowledge that I was arrested for a crime Dad commissioned. From the realization that my own father destroyed my life to protect his criminal empire. Dylan was quiet for a long moment. Zoe, you're scaring me. You sound paranoid. I sound paranoid because I'm being hunted by dangerous people. Because Dad has connections to violent criminals who might try to silence me to protect him. I think you need help, professional help. I think you need to open your eyes and see what's really happening in our family. Come to the meeting tonight. Let Dad explain his side of the story. Let the family work through this together. I can't do that, Dylan. It's not safe from your own family, not safe from the criminals Dad has been working with. I ended the call feeling more isolated than ever. My brother didn't believe me, and he probably never would until he saw evidence for himself. My father had spent years crafting his image as a successful businessman and devoted family man, and it would take more than my word to convince people that it was all a lie. Marcus had been listening to my side of the conversation, and he could see the devastation on my face. I'm sorry, I know how much you were hoping your brother would believe you. He thinks I'm crazy. He thinks Marcus is manipulating me. Your father is very good at manipulation. He's had years to perfect his techniques. What if he's right? What if I am crazy? What if I'm seeing criminal conspiracies where there are only normal business practices? Marcus moved closer, his hands gentle on my shoulders. Zoe, look at me. You're not crazy. We have evidence. We have documentation. We have witness statements, and financial records, and surveillance footage. Your father is involved in criminal activity, and he's been using your shame and fear to keep you quiet about it. But what if the evidence is wrong? What if we're misinterpreting everything? Then we'll face the consequences of our mistakes. But I'd rather make a mistake trying to seek justice than make a mistake by staying silent while criminals operate with impunity. That afternoon, Marcus received a call from Detective Ramirez with an update on the investigation. I could only hear Marcus's side of the conversation, but his increasingly grim expression told me the news wasn't good. What happened? I asked when he hung up. 3 of our key witnesses have recanted their statement.
Gary Chen, the man whose car lot was burned down, now says he thinks the fire was accidental. Robert Torres, who was assaulted in his parking lot, now says he was mugged by a random stranger. And the convenience store clerk from your case says he's not sure about the details he gave us originally. They're being intimidated. Or paid off. Your father has had 3 days to reach out to these people and convince them to change their stories. So what does that mean for the investigation? It means we need to find new evidence, or we need to find a way to protect our witnesses so they feel safe telling the truth. How do we do that? We go public. We make it impossible for your father to intimidate witnesses, because everyone will be watching. I felt my stomach drop. You want to go to the media? I want to hold a press conference. I want to announce that we're investigating criminal activity connected to Brennan Auto Group. Once it's public knowledge, your father won't be able to silence witnesses through intimidation. And what happens to me when my face is all over the news, as the daughter who turned in her own father? You become a hero. You become someone who was brave enough to seek justice, even when it meant standing up to her own family. Or I become a target. Marcus, if my father really is connected to violent criminals, going public could put me in serious danger. You're already in danger. Hiding isn't going to make you safer in the long run. I spent the rest of the afternoon thinking about Marcus's suggestion. Going public would mean giving up any chance of reconciliation with my family. It would mean accepting that my relationship with my parents was over, that I was choosing justice over family loyalty. But what kind of family was I being loyal to? A family that had allowed me to suffer for years to protect the reputation of a criminal. a family that was more concerned with appearances than with truth. That evening, I made my decision. I want to do the press conference. Marcus looked surprised. Are you sure? I'm sure. I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of carrying shame that doesn't belong to me. I'm tired of letting my father control my life through fear and manipulation. Once we do this, there's no going back. Your relationship with your family will be over. My relationship with my family has been over for years. I've just been too afraid to admit it. The press conference was scheduled for the next morning at the Portland Police Bureau. Marcus and I spent the evening preparing my statement, going over the questions I might be asked, and discussing how to handle hostile reporters or attempts to discredit my story. Remember, Marcus said as we practiced, you're not just a victim in this story. You're someone who chose to seek justice, even when it was difficult. You're someone who put principle over family loyalty. And if they ask about my arrest, you tell the truth. You were wrongfully arrested for a crime you didn't commit, and you've now learned that the real perpetrator was working for your father. You're seeking justice not just for yourself, but for all the other victims of your father's criminal enterprise. I barely slept that night, running through my statement over and over in my mind. When morning came, I dressed carefully in a navy blue suit, trying to look professional and credible. I wanted people to see me as someone who was brave enough to tell the truth, not as someone who was seeking revenge against her family. The police station was crowded with reporters when we arrived. I recognized faces from the local news stations, and I could see cameras and microphones being set up in the main conference room. My hands were shaking as Marcus led me through the crowd of journalists and officials. You don't have to do this, he whispered as we reached the podium. If you've changed your mind, we can find another way. I haven't changed my mind, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I need to do this. The press conference began with Detective Ramirez giving a brief overview of the investigation. He explained that new evidence had come to light, suggesting that Richard Brennan, owner of Brennan Auto Group, had been involved in criminal activity designed to eliminate business competition. Then it was my turn to speak. I stepped up to the podium, looking out at the sea of cameras and reporters, and began to tell my story. My name is Zoe Brennan, and I'm here today to tell you about a pattern of criminal activity that has been hidden for years behind the facade of a successful business empire. 5 years ago, I was wrongfully arrested for armed robbery. I spent 3 terrifying days in jail before evidence proved my innocence. What I didn't know then was that the real perpetrator was working for my father, Richard Brennan. A murmur went through the crowd of reporters. I could see hands shooting up, questions being shouted, but I continued with my prepared statement. For 5 years I've carried shame and fear because of that arrest. My father convinced me that talking about it would only make things worse, that the best thing I could do was stay quiet and try to forget. What I now realize is that he was protecting himself, not me. He was using my silence to cover up his own criminal activity. I paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. My father has been using violent criminals to eliminate business competition. He has been commissioning robberies, assaults, and arson to drive competitors out of business. He has been funding his business expansion with proceeds from criminal activity. And when I was arrested for one of these crimes, he saw an opportunity to keep me quiet and under his control. The questions came fast and furious after. Reporters wanted to know about specific crimes, about evidence, about my relationship with my family. I answered as honestly as I could, sticking to the facts and refusing to speculate about things I couldn't prove. Why are you coming forward now? Asked a reporter from Channel. Because I've learned that staying silent doesn't protect anyone, except the criminals. Because I've realized that my father's actions have hurt other people, and I can't stand by and let that continue. Do you have any regrets about exposing your own family? I regret that it was necessary. I regret that my father chose criminal activity over legal business practices. but I don't regret seeking justice. What do you hope to accomplish with these allegations? I hope to see my father and his criminal associates held accountable for their actions. I hope to see justice for the victims of their crimes, and I hope to help other people who have been manipulated and controlled by family members understand that they have the right to seek truth and justice. The press conference lasted about an hour, and by the time it was over, I felt drained but relieved. I'd told my story publicly, and there was no taking it back now. Whatever happened next, I'd done everything I could to seek justice. As we left the police station, Marcus's phone was already ringing with calls from other media outlets wanting follow-up interviews. My phone was buzzing with messages from people I hadn't heard from in years, some supportive, others angry and accusatory. "How do you feel?" Marcus asked as we drove back to the safe house. "Terrified," I admitted, "but also free. For the first time in 5 years, I don't have to carry my father's secrets anymore." "What do you think your family's reaction will be?" "I think they'll be furious. I think they'll try to discredit me, maybe claim I'm mentally unstable, or lying for attention. But I also think some of them, maybe Dylan or my mother, will start to question things they've been ignoring for years. And if they don't, then I'll build a new family. I'll surround myself with people who value truth and justice over appearances and control." That afternoon, the story was picked up by news stations across the Pacific Northwest. My face was on television, my story was being discussed on radio talk shows, and social media was buzzing with opinions about my allegations. Some people were supportive, calling me brave for speaking out against family corruption. Others were skeptical, questioning my motives and suggesting that I was seeking attention or revenge. A few were hostile, accusing me of being a disloyal daughter who was trying to destroy a successful businessman, but the response that mattered most came from other victims. People who had been hurt by my father's criminal enterprise, people who had been afraid to speak out because they thought no one would believe them. They began coming forward with their own stories, their own evidence, their own demands for justice. By evening, Detective Ramirez had received calls from 6 additional witnesses, all with stories that corroborated our theory about my father's criminal activities. The case that had seemed to be falling apart just days earlier was now stronger than ever. "We did it," Marcus said that night as we watched the news coverage of my press conference. "We made it impossible for your father to intimidate witnesses or cover up evidence. What happens now? Now we prepare for trial. Your father will probably be arrested within the next few days, and his criminal associates will be picked up soon after. You'll need to testify, and it won't be easy, but you've already done the hardest part, which was choosing truth over family loyalty, choosing justice over comfort, choosing to fight back instead of staying silent." I looked at this man who had stood by me through the most difficult period of my life, who had helped me find the strength to seek justice even when it meant destroying my family. "What if I hadn't met you? What if I'd never found out the truth about my father? You would have figured it out eventually. You're stronger than you think, Zoe. You always were." As we prepared for bed that night, I thought about the young woman who had been arrested 5 years ago, frightened and alone and convinced that her life was over. She couldn't have imagined that she would someday stand in front of news cameras and demand justice for herself and others. She couldn't have known that her worst nightmare would eventually become her greatest strength. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be legal proceedings, family confrontations, and probably more attempts to discredit my story. But tonight, for the first time in 5 years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I was no longer my father's victim. I was no longer carrying shame that didn't belong to me. I was no longer afraid of the truth. I was someone who had chosen justice over family loyalty, and I was proud of that choice. The courthouse in downtown Portland buzzed with activity on the morning of my father's arraignment. 3 weeks had passed since the press conference, and the investigation had expanded beyond anything I could have imagined. What started as a simple case of wrongful arrest had uncovered a criminal network that stretched across 3 states and involved dozens of victims. I sat in the gallery behind the prosecution table, watching as Richard Brennan was led into the courtroom in handcuffs. He looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by the orange jumpsuit and the weight of 17 felony charges. When his eyes found mine across the crowded courtroom, I saw something I'd never seen before: genuine fear. Marcus squeezed my hand as the judge read the charges: racketeering, conspiracy, money laundering, witness intimidation, and accessory to armed robbery. Each charge represented years of criminal activity, years of my father choosing profit over people, including his own daughter. "How do you plead?" the judge asked. "Not guilty, Your Honor," my father's attorney replied, but his voice lacked conviction. After the arraignment, I found myself face to face with my mother and Dylan in the courthouse hallway. Patricia looked like she'd aged 10 years in 3 weeks, her usually perfect appearance disheveled and worn. Dylan's expression was unreadable, but I could see the conflict in his eye. "Are you happy now?" my mother asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you satisfied with what you've done to our family?" "I'm satisfied that the truth is finally coming out," I replied. "I'm satisfied that Dad's victims are getting just. Your father is a good man who made some bad decisions. He doesn't deserve to go to prison. The families of the businesses he destroyed might disagree with you." Dylan stepped forward, his hands shoved deep in his pocket. "Zoe, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Okay." "Did you know, when you were growing up, did you know that Dad was involved in criminal activity?" I thought carefully before answering. I knew something was wrong. I knew he had meetings late at night with people who didn't look like legitimate business associates. I knew he was funding expansions that didn't match his reported income. But I was too scared to ask questions, and he made sure I stayed that way. By using my arrest to keep me ashamed and isolated, by convincing me that my past made me unworthy of love or success, by making me believe that staying quiet was the only way to protect myself. My mother made a sound that might have been a sob. "He was trying to protect you. He was trying to keep you safe from people who would use your arrest against you." "No, Mom. He was trying to keep me quiet so I wouldn't interfere with his criminal enterprise." "There's a difference. You're destroying our family," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Dad destroyed our family years ago. I'm just refusing to pretend otherwise anymore." Dylan looked back and forth between us, his expression pained. "What happens now?" "Now we all have to live with the consequences of the choices we've made. Dad chose to be a criminal, and now he'll face justice. You and Mom chose to ignore the signs of his criminal activity, and now you'll have to live with that knowledge. I chose to seek the truth, and now I'll have to live with the fallout." "And us?" Dylan asked. "What happens to our relationship?" I considered the question carefully. "That depends on whether you can accept that I did the right thing, even if it was painful. I love you, Dylan, but I can't have a relationship with people who think I should have stayed silent about criminal activity to protect the family reputation." "I don't know if I can forgive you for this," my mother said. "I don't know if I can forgive you for standing by while Dad used my trauma to control me," I replied. "But maybe someday we can find a way to move forward." The trial lasted 6 weeks. I testified for 3 days, telling the court about my arrest, my father's reaction, and the years of manipulation that followed. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but also the most liberating. Every question I answered, every detail I provided, was another step toward justice. The defense tried to paint me as a disgruntled daughter seeking revenge against a successful father. They suggested I was mentally unstable, that my accusations were the product of a delusional mind. But the prosecution had too much evidence, too many witnesses, too many documented crimes for the defense strategy to work. When the guilty verdict was read, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that justice had been served, sadness that it had come to this. My father was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after 10 years. His criminal associate Tony Valdez received 25 years for his role in the robberies and assaults. The civil lawsuits followed quickly. Gary Chen, whose car lot had been burned down, sued for damages and won. Robert Torres, who had been assaulted, received a settlement that would help him rebuild his business. The convenience store where I had been arrested became part of a class action lawsuit that eventually resulted in a multi-million-dollar judgment against my father's estate. Throughout it all,
Marcus stood by me. He testified as a witness, supported me through the difficult days, and helped me navigate the complex legal and emotional landscape that followed my father's arrest. 6 months after the trial ended, he proposed to me again, this time with full knowledge of everything I'd been through. "I proposed the first time because I loved you," he said, as we walked along the Willamette River on a crisp autumn evening. "I'm proposing again because I admire you, because you're the strongest, bravest person I know." We were married the following spring, in a small ceremony at the Portland Art Museum. Dylan was there, having slowly come to understand that I'd done the right thing. My mother was not, still too angry and hurt to forgive me for destroying the family she'd thought she knew. The media attention eventually died down, but the impact of my story continued to resonate. I received letters from people who had been manipulated by family members, from victims of white-collar crime who had been afraid to speak out, from children of criminals who had struggled with guilt and shame that didn't belong to them. I started speaking at conferences about financial crimes and victim advocacy. I worked with prosecutors to help them understand how family manipulation could be used to silence victims. I testified before legislative committees about the need for stronger witness protection programs. But the most meaningful work I did was one-on-one, helping individuals who found themselves in situations similar to mine. People who had discovered that their families were involved in criminal activity, people who were struggling with whether to come forward, people who needed to know that they weren't alone. "The hardest part," I told a young woman whose father was embezzling from his clients, "isn't deciding to seek justice. It's accepting that the family you thought you had never really existed." "How do you live with that?" she asked. "You build a new family. You surround yourself with people who value truth and integrity. You learn that loyalty to principles is more important than loyalty to people who don't deserve it." 2 years after the trial, I received an unexpected visitor at my design studio. Dylan knocked on my door on a rainy Thursday afternoon, looking nervous and uncertain. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, "about how we all have to live with the consequences of our choices. And I think I've been living with the wrong consequence. I've been angry at you for exposing Dad's crimes, when I should have been angry at him for committing them. It's not too late to change your perspective. I want to try. I want to understand how you found the strength to do what you did. I want to learn how to be brave like you." It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was a beginning. Dylan and I started having lunch once a month, slowly rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of honesty instead of shared denial. He even attended one of my speaking engagements, sitting in the back of the room and listening as I told my story to a group of financial crime investigators. My mother remained distant, but she did send a card on my birthday with a brief note. "I'm beginning to understand that you were protecting more than just yourself. I'm not ready to forgive, but I'm trying to understand." It wasn't much, but it was some. The real transformation wasn't in my relationships with my family members though, it was in my relationship with myself. I was no longer someone who carried shame that didn't belong to me. I was no longer someone who stayed silent to keep the peace. I was someone who had chosen truth over comfort, justice over family loyalty, and courage over fear. The scared young woman who had been arrested 5 years earlier had become someone who helped other scared people find their voice. The daughter who had been manipulated and controlled had become someone who helped others recognize manipulation in their own lives. I kept one thing from my old life, the mugshot from my arrest. I had it framed and hung in my office, not as a reminder of shame, but as a reminder of strength. Every time I looked at it, I remembered that the worst thing that had ever happened to me had also been the beginning of my real life. Marcus often found me looking at that photograph, and he always knew what I was thinking. "She had no idea what she was capable of," he would say. "No," I would reply, "but she was about to find out." The convenience store where I had been arrested was demolished 2 years ago to make way for a new shopping center. The site where my life had been forever changed was now a parking lot, unremarkable and forgettable. But the impact of what happened there continued to ripple outward, affecting the lives of people I would never meet. Every person who found the courage to speak out against family corruption, every victim who refused to be silenced, every individual who chose truth over comfortable lies, was part of a movement that started with one woman's decision to stop carrying shame that didn't belong to her. On the 5th anniversary of my arrest, Marcus and I drove to the site where the convenience store had been. We stood in the parking lot, looking at the ordinary strip mall that had replaced the scene of my nightmare. "Any regrets?" he asked. "About seeking justice? Never. About losing most of my family? Sometimes, but I've learned that you can't build a real life on a foundation of lies, even if they're comfortable lies. And now I'm exactly who I was meant to be. Someone who refuses to be silenced, someone who stands up for truth even when it's difficult, someone who helps others find their own strength." We drove home through the familiar streets of Portland, past the police station where I had held my press conference, past the courthouse where justice had been served, past the safe house where I had found the courage to fight back. I thought about all the people who had been part of my journey, the witnesses who had found the courage to testify, the prosecutors who had believed in my story, the reporters who had told my story fairly, the strangers who had sent letters of support. Most of all, I thought about the detective who had cleared my name years before I knew he existed, who had fallen in love with me not despite my past, but because of how I had survived it, who had stood by me through the hardest fight of my life. "Thank you," I said as we pulled into our driveway. "For what?" "For seeing who I really was before I saw it myself, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself, for helping me find the strength to fight back. You had that strength all along, you just needed someone to help you recognize it." As we walked into our house, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you've done the right thing, even when it was the hard thing. I had chosen justice over family loyalty, truth over comfort, courage over fear, and in making those choices, I had discovered who I really was. I was no longer my father's victim. I was no longer carrying shame that didn't belong to me. I was no longer afraid of the truth. I was someone who had fought back and won, someone who had transformed her worst nightmare into her greatest strength, someone who had learned that the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be silenced. And that was exactly who I was meant to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.